Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started. I don't think we're quite at quorum today, but just to be respectful of everyone who is present, because we do have a wonderful group here with us today. So want to make sure that we are being most respectful of your time to get you out of here today after we conduct our business. So on behalf of the Early Childhood Care and Education Commission, I call this meeting to order. I am Jenna Chasson from the Louisiana Department of Education. I am chairing today in the stead of Representative Hilferty and Senator Mizell. Senator Regina Barrow. Here. 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 Lindsay Fisher. Here. Yolanda Motley. Here. Dr. Keith Perrin. Here. Mayor Shea Perkins. Here. Dr. Paula Polito. Here. Caitlin Robinson. Here. Monique Rouge. Cindy Russell. Here. Here. Judy Thompson. Mike. Here. Nancy. Here. Allison Trade. Here. Lynn Smith there. Here. Here. Yes, and we will add Representative Barbara Freiberg as present. So we do not have a quorum. So next, I'll read our required statement for a meeting without a quorum. A meeting without a quorum of the membership present does not constitute a meeting in which business can be conducted and motions will not be recorded. However, we as the LDOE will present the information outlined on the agenda for discussion among the members who are present here today, and public comment will still be accepted. Although we cannot vote on the minutes from our last meeting, are there any corrections that we need to note? Any corrections to note on the minutes from the last meeting? Okay, with no corrections to note, we will move on to our next agenda item. Our first presentation and discussion will be the consideration of the February 2024 ECCE Commission draft report. So I will hand it over to Ms. Karen Powell to present this item.
Good afternoon. We have a new live streaming procedure, so thank you for learning with us today. So as you may recall, the goals and purpose of the Early Childhood Care and Education Commission and Task Force are the following. The task force is charged with the following: to identify and recommend alternative state and local funding strategies for quality early childhood care and education, and to identify and recommend strategies to address workforce compensation and benefits issues within the early childhood care and education field. And each year, the task force brings those reports forward. There's a report that is drafted out of that discussion and those recommendations. And that's what we are here to present to you today.
Like Trump,
we do think
aren't left to the mercy of a small group.
The task force members that you can see listed here. And so we will jump into the drafted Early Childhood Care and Education Commission report for February 2024. The proposed title for this year's first report is Maximizing Returns, Our Smartest Investment for Louisiana's Future. And you can see, as in years past, we have drafted up an executive summary. We propose to have an introduction, the recommendations themselves, the conclusion, and then the bibliography. So to begin with the executive summary, you have in your packet the full report. So you can follow along there or with the slides. But you see that the goal this year was to keep the executive summary to one page to make it very short, easy to read, draw the attention. You see that it essentially hits on the 3 recommendations proposed by the task force this year and reminds the legislature of how important this commitment is and the investment is and how many more children still need to be served. The idea is that at the bottom or along the side, however the graphics folks choose to do it and decide it works best, but somewhere on this page, the suggestion for the report this year was to add pictures of real infants and toddlers in Louisiana. So that's what we expect to be added to this executive summary. So we can either discuss the recommendations now, or we can go into them one by one. Maybe that's the best way.
I was just also just to remind us as a commission that this is almost like an interim report because we have another one due in September. So this one is more condensed, correct?
Yes, exactly. Thank you for noting that. And so I think the thinking was as the work of that task force continues throughout this year and digs in deeper, this is that transitional year in which the schedule for the reports means there are 2 reports going out this year. And so since this is the first of those required reports, the idea was, I think, to keep it direct, short, and sweet. All right, so if there are no immediate recommendations about the executive summary, we can return to it if we have changes in other sections of the report, but I would suggest, yes, Dr. Perrin.
I did want to mention that on the back half of it, we talk about the 13% return that's based on the Heckman study for what I called ABC care. That's how he mentioned it. And that is not data based directly on Louisiana care. And we really need to work, and maybe you could tell us what we're doing at the Department of Education to generate our own data that we can make a big scene about and tell them how wonderful we're doing.
I think that is difficult to do because that's not data that the Louisiana Department of Education necessarily has access to. We don't have that kind of longitudinal study taking place. So I do take your point about the benefit of that data being Louisiana specific. it's not something that we currently have access to. What we have included in the report, I believe it's in the introduction, is we do have a local economist, a Louisiana economist, who has estimated what he thinks the return would be over those 10 years. And he has estimated that it would be a $1.8 billion return.
No,
over
that's
10
much
years.
more solid. The numbers are, but the educational part is what's happening to the child. And basically it's in my way of thinking about it, because I'm a pediatrician and care about those kids. It's the more important part. Now, the dollar figure is probably far more powerful when we're negotiating and important to have there. And I think that's a much more solid number. But I'd love to see a more solid number of how good our daycare centers, child care educational centers are, excuse me. And there should be some data we can glean and put together in a compiled fashion. But we have to start collecting it and putting it somewhere.
So I think there might be others in the room who are more familiar. I welcome you to speak if you're more familiar. My understanding is there are limitations currently to how and what we can, what data we can look at over time for young children and for students. And I think there were some proposals in last year's session that might work to begin obtaining that data. But I know that is what has been the challenge for us in the past, that we could not begin collecting that data in early childhood and link it to what continued afterwards. We had some private studies that looked at the impact of LA4 participation on children in later grades, but those were, commissioned and very narrow research projects.
Thank you.
So shall we turn to the introduction? So you can see that the introduction tries to make the case for the importance of this investment and tries to summarize the investment that's been made so far and how important that investment has been. It notes the number of children that have been served with those additional investments. It notes that the new rates that were instituted in February 2022 more closely reflect the true cost of quality care. It notes what a lifesaver these services were, this care was during the pandemic. And while it acknowledges how many children have benefited from the investment thus far, it does note the number of children, the difference between the original commission ask and now of how many children are still waiting to be served. It begins to talk in that third paragraph about the value of the return, what that return on investment is, how it is related to stability, health, and economic prosperity, educational attainment, more skilled workforce, improved health and social outcomes, greater self-reliance, stronger communities, cost savings, and talks about some of the achievements of the last 5 years because of the early childhood investments. And then it reiterates the 3 recommendations that are proposed for this year's report. So are there questions or suggestions about any language or any sections of the introduction?
For the, it says the state investment has benefit, I guess it's a call, it'll be a call out box, 78,000 more children.
It could be.
I guess I'm asking, and then the 78,000 more children, is that over a number of years?
That would be over the 10 years. I mean, if the state chose to make a higher investment, it could serve more children faster, but that's looking at that 10-year proposal of investment. If the state wants to invest this
It's not-
amount now and for the next 10 years.
It's just not clear, like if you were just to read it cold. Because how it reads now is that the state investment has benefited tens of thousands of young children, and there are approximately 78,000 more children who are ready to learn and grow. I don't know if anybody else thinks it's unclear or not.
Yeah. What would someone suggest about how to rephrase it?
It could be as simple as just, we served this many at the peak, we're down to here now. Within 1 year, we could get back to where we were during COVID, and within this many years, we could serve 100% of the at-risk cohort. Libby, which report is it that has that wonderful graphic of the kids all lined up with the?
Yeah, we used that during legislative session.
Yeah, maybe it's something as simple as, using a similar visual. That was so impactful.
I think maybe what's trying to be conveyed is that because of the state's investments over maybe the last 5 years with the COVID monies, that this number of children were able to be ready to learn and grow, or I just don't understand the number.
So I think you're looking at the number has decreased from the original commission ask. If you remember, that original commission ask was 114,000 economically disadvantaged children. That was based on the economically disadvantaged cohort. The original commission decided that it would be perhaps too, I think there were probably several factors that went into deciding how to adjust that ask. So I think some of the factor was thinking it would be a lot to ask for funding for 100% of the economically disadvantaged cohort. I think there was also thinking about the fact that there is parental and family choice, and not every family would need or would want the care. And so the original commission ask was for 2/3 of that economically disadvantaged cohort. Over the last several years, that cohort number has decreased. The number of live births has decreased, and the number of children in the state has decreased. And then in addition, the number of children served has increased, partially with the stimulus funds, but especially with the enormous investment of the legislature over the last several years.
How it reads just cold is that 78,000 children have benefited from investment. Instead of what you're saying, there's 78,000 children that still need support. But it's reading like approximately 78,000 more young children are ready to learn and grow because they got that investment.
So how could we reword that to Dr. Sonia's point?
Simple as in need of the same investment.
Yeah, like a period after that first sentence.
I'm on page 2. Yeah, slide 16.
That has too many R's in it. To begin with, but why don't you just say however there are possible.
I think because if you read in the report on page 2, and it's the same thing. No, it's exactly the same thing. It reads like 78,000 more children have had access.
Benefited tens of thousands of children. However, there are possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or direct, it still needs support rather than ready to learn and grow. Direct and what exactly would you say?
So would you want to keep it as it is now, but maybe add in and still need access? No, I'm sorry. I meant the last part, Dr. Craig. Yes, so no, my apologies. However, there are approximately 78,000 more young children who are ready to learn and grow and still need access.
Yeah, that would work.
That works.
Yes.
Thank you for being patient with me as I was trying to get my words out.
Great, thank you. Still need access to high quality care and education,
Yes.
early care and education. Okay. Got it. Thank you. Dr. Sonia, to your earlier point, do you think you would like to see it in a call out box?
No, I just
Okay.
needed that. It was reading clunky to me and it wasn't clear. So if y'all wanted to do that, that's more power to you, but I just like the clarity of this sentence.
Other comments or suggestions or questions about the introductory content? And to your point, we'll make sure we make that note for the executive summary as well. Let's see. Well, do you feel like we need to? Yes, so we would, I think it would be a change at the bottom of the executive summary. There's, we would just add
Yes.
on to Dr. Craig's point, there are 78,000 more young children who are ready to grow, ready to learn and grow and still need ...
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Anything else in the introduction?
Can we talk about the recommendations now or do you want to
Yes.
talk about them later?
What do you think about going into them one by one and moving to recommendation one? Is that good? All right, let's move to recommendation one then. And so are there thoughts about the recommendation or the supporting content under recommendation one?
I just want to open up a strategy conversation here, and it might not be appropriate for this time because we know our report's due to the legislature, but might help us think about long-term, since we know we'll have another report due within 30 days at the end of the fiscal year, so September. The recommendation one, the number's gone down, which is good. I mean, we knew we needed $115 million annually for a decade. But now it says invest 98 million for, a decade. One of the questions I have is strategy wise, if we keep the 115 number and say over 8 years, because we've had the investment and it would decrease the number of years that you'd have to get to the point that we're serving, 2/3 of our at-risk children. So it could be invest 115 million of additional state funds in high quality early care and education now and annually over 8 years to ensure statewide access. Because you could thank the legislature for what they've done and that the number has been reduced. Again, I know we're late in the game, but it's a strategy question for either now or for the later report.
And I think part of that deliberation is what will be more palatable. So, and I think it's just interpreting how the legislature might view that. So do they feel like one recognizes their efforts more, or do they feel like one gives them more time to build up to that number? It's a good strategy question.
Good representative. Oh, I was looking at you. Maybe shed some light on that.
The-
Not sure how to answer it. I mean,
Oh.
the lower number is probably one that's more receptive.
And I think what Libby said is like, we'll keep the lower number, but verse 10 years, push it to 8.
Yeah, if you kept 115, it would go down to 8 years.
Okay.
I mean, I think either way you go, I mean, you're kind of splitting hairs, but either way you go, I think we have to give thanks and gratefulness for what the legislature has done over the last number of years, when we went from nothing invested into our childcare assistance program to now $87 million. So again, it's a strategy question, not one that we have to figure out today, but as the commission moves forward and we get to know the new body, the new legislature too. Right.
Dr. Perrin.
But but if you move forward with the 150, at first I didn't understand this completely, but I think I do at this point. If you leave it at the 115, that's something that's recognizable that it happened before and will happen again. And changing it from 10 to 8 years makes it sound like we've got an improvement, but it's because of an improving or the help that's already been given by the legislature. And I think that gives them, or gives the legislature, more accolades for what they've done. And whatever they're going to fund is going to happen no matter what the number is. They only have whatever they have to be able to use. So you might as well ask for the 115 and find out. What do you think, Representative?
It's fair. Again, not something that has to be figured out. Again, not something we have to figure out today, but just wanted to put it on the record to just continue to discuss.
Other thoughts about that strategy question or about any of the content here, supporting content under recommendation 1? Yes, sir. Thank you.
Acronym, or do we need to spell that acronym out somewhere?
That's a good question. I think some of us are familiar with it, but from doing it, but exactly, to Dr. Sonia's point too, new legislators, and will they really be thinking that way? So we'll look for where it seems to first appear in each section and then maybe reiterate it. Thank you, Ms. Buxton.
Also, y'all are really clear here and underneath the highlighted to come visual showing that there are approximately 78,000 young children in Louisiana still waiting for the opportunity. So it's clear there.
You added the still though. Would you suggest that we add the still, the actual word, or keep it as waiting?
That's a
Because it's it's an interesting thing that you verbalized it, because I was thinking of that word myself before we got there. We're talking about the second to last paragraph on page 4 of the report. And yes, this one makes it clearer than in the executive summary in the introduction that they are waiting for the opportunity to learn and grow. But do you think it should add the word still waiting, or it's good as it is?
Still waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Tipton. All right, any other thoughts about recommendation 1? All right, if not, we will turn to recommendation 2. So is there any feedback? Are there any comments on the recommendation itself or the supporting information? What happened with this recommendation, if you're interested in a little bit of the context of the task force discussion, there was discussion about making a specific ask this year for a specific amount to the fund, as has been done in years past. And as the task force considered very near the end of the meeting, they said, and actually we have task force members here who could speak to it, but the discussion became, we don't want to ask for a specific dollar amount each year. We want to ask that the state guarantees that it will match that local investment. And so that's where this language arose from in recommendation 2.
I mean, fine with the concepts. I do think the headline language is a little wordy. There's a couple ands that start confusing things. So, to match and incentivize ongoing and increasing. So there's probably, whether it's headline, the sub bullet, or something that just breaks that up.
Karen, I know that we briefly discussed putting a cap or a limit on what that funding would be, because eventually they're just going to pull from one pot to feed the other, I think. So do we want to add that or just leave this one more basic? So when they're looking at both, they're going to have to put money into this one, which I believe money will come from the bigger pot to make that happen. So
Another strategy question.
How much of the 32.8 million was matched?
Well, this year it's approximately 25 million. So we've had 7 parishes in this current academic year raise and receive 25 million in matching funds. It's for next year that we're expecting it would be the almost 30. I'm sorry, it would be 31 million that parishes would be asking for. To your point, Dr. Perrin, the 32.8 is how much is remaining in the fund as
Oh,
of
remaining
January.
at this point.
Yes,
All right.
sorry.
So you could put language in there to suggest that should this fund come close to depletion, it is a very, in some way, to say that it's a useful fund and we would feel that it should be enhanced. You're getting local involvement in the process. I think the legislature could understand that. And the local buy-in is most important for the child care centers. They know them better than anyone else knows them. And it's money well spent for getting involvement in those daycare centers.
Any suggestions for?
I would just say, I don't think you should say it should be matched. I think we have to use the word. I think the money needs to be. I like the word.
No, but the should be matched after the money. To suggest that if local government is willing to put up more funding, that the state government should step up to the plate and make a match.
But I do think there has been conversation of used up. And part of that was just not knowledge by the legislature that that money was encumbered and would be paid out before the end of June. But if you have a fund that continually has this huge part, I think there's going to be skepticism.
No, I get your point.
Well, and of course, we are all grateful for the one-time investment of $40 million, but thanks to the success of local networks this year and next year, it will finally be, there will be some more added into the pot this year still. There's a little bit projected, but you're looking at approximately $10 to $12 million annually being projected right now, which does not meet an annual 31 million plus ask. So we should be clearing out the fund pretty soon.
And that's important. I think those local commitments are very important, and I think it's important for the state to some skin in this game too. Have to put their, but locals aren't gonna vote. Taxes, state's not gonna have the money. But they're putting in, so.
And the idea of a visual here is very similar to last year's, but showing, we went from 3 or 4 parishes to 7 to 14. That's a pretty impressive scaling each year. I think will help make the case.
I'm wondering, Karen, if we need to add what you just said into that paragraph, because I think you said it really clearly just now when you talked about that shortfall. And I know that many legislators they're very familiar with the fact that something has passed and gone into this pot. They may not remember exactly what it was. They certainly probably don't know how much it's generating, because we've been keeping an eye on that the last few years, because of course it was off during COVID, and we're kind of just getting those good projections now over the last few months. So maybe we should just add in a single sentence. I think when you said it, it kind of clicked for me that in recommendation 2, we should probably clearly explain that although there is some current commitment, it is projecting to still, fall very short of what we're seeing locals raise.
And I don't think most have any clue what pots any early childhood. They just know a big total number.
And they've heard
Agreed.
enough, I think, the last few years that they know that some money has been appropriated to it. They know that possibly, but not what it is or how much it is, and that it's still falling so short.
So thoughts about that, maybe reworking that second sentence in the second paragraph under recommendation 2, although as of early January 2024, there's a current balance of $32.8 million. The Early Childhood Education Fund is projected to fall short, something of that nature.
Could you make a estimation of when it might be depleted if we continue with just the 14 parishes we know we have now? Like the fund would deplete.
It would be nearly deplete by the end of 2024, 2025.
That's what I ask for is something to look at how these funds will look in the future.
And I think that's a good start, yet it doesn't take into account the momentum that we are beginning to gain. Exactly. Not only more people in the network, but just in Jefferson as we're about to launch some really deep
Well, and then we
campaign.
have, oil and gas companies now that we know about that they have to spend a certain percentage on environmental justice issues. And there's an appetite for putting some of those environmental justice dollars into early care and education locations that don't have type 3 centers that want to grow. And so if that comes to fruition, we're talking about some decent money there, and they would want to know that their monies are matched too, because they're putting skin in the game.
So perhaps with a little additional wordsmithing, are you thinking yes, kind of finesse that sentence a little bit to either discuss a shortfall or a depletion and a time frame? Right. I can't promise we've got those words perfect today,
That's
but
a positive, because it shows that locals are getting more involved, and that's good government. It needs to be emphasized.
all right. So we will work on that phrasing. Thank you very, very much. Anything else on recommendation 2 before we move to recommendation 3? All right, so recommendation 3 really came out of, both at the commission and the task force. We had Children's Funding Project come and talk about some of the additional ways that other states have raised additional revenue in the recent years. And, Dr. Sonier has just talked about other future possibilities. And so, again, the task force members could express this better than I, but there was some discussion about the possibility and the thinking that there is still some revenue out there that could potentially be directed towards early childhood. And so that's where this recommendation to, review revenue and resources to identify additional potential sustainable funding, and really wanting to get across that point, Ms. Gudo, to your point, sustainable funding, not pulling from one pot, not saying, well, you can choose between these options, really thinking about the whole picture in a sustainable way.
I just want to echo what Representative Freeberg said. I think it's important that we implore upon the state that the onus is not just on them. Research says it needs to be federal, state, and local. And as those locals gain momentum and identify which areas they can pull from, philanthropists, government, local businesses, to help fund ECE in their area, I think it helps the state to feel a little more comfortable because, yeah, I've got skin in the game, but so do they. So it just pulls some pressure off of them. So I'm glad it's written out in an executive summary and then detailed here. And I know as I believe it's Ascension Parish kicks things off and they look to Jefferson as what worked for you all. We're still figuring out what works for us and who to tap into. So I think we're going to see that momentum begin to build. And maybe that's the verbiage you use in recommendation 2 is momentum, as you begin developing those relationships. And, we've still got so much education to do on the local level about this isn't locals thinking up strategies to spend time and bring money in. This is a charge from the Department of Education. Like, let's work together. So
I guess my question is, because I agree with everything. Is this really a recommendation or is there a different way to phrase this?
whether it's a recommendation or not, I hear what you're saying, Libby. We want to make sure that the state knows that our locals are working to take the pressure off of them.
I think there was some deliberation with current recommendation 3. Should it be a recommendation per se, or should it be, you may recall in the past, we've had some ideas to champion. So that was discussed. I think that either is possible. I think that one way of thinking about it was wanting it not to sound so much like just a suggestion and something to champion, but no, please look at this, study this, figure out what we're missing out on or what we could use differently. So I think that was one viewpoint in how it's been proposed thus far.
Dr. Polito. Hi, I'm down here to your left. It's Madeline. Hello. It's good to see you. I had a quick question, Dr. Polito. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I wanted to ask, are you suggesting that we added an additional sentence to this section in order to convey like the local participation, or are you saying that what's listed right now is sufficient?
In recommendation 3, I think what's there is sufficient. In recommendation 2, perhaps using the verbiage momentum, I liked because we were trying to wordsmith that a bit. But I think it's important that we articulate to the legislation that we are working very hard and diligently at the local level to take some of the pressure and onus off of them. So, and per Representative Farberg's suggestion, keep it as a recommendation. I'd love to know more, like, because do you feel like that makes them think, okay, we're working as well, it's not just on you, or?
I think because it stresses the importance of working.
Local. Okay.
Any thoughts about any of the supporting content under recommendation 3?
Does it need a visual? Something along the lines of, you've called out here 56.6% of early childhood education funding's coming from federal sources with, those relatively smaller slices from the other areas. All the other recommendations have a visual except for this one.
I think that's a question for the commission. I would say that I think that anywhere that there's space, I think what's sort of nice about this year's report is it is direct, very direct, not abrupt, but direct and to the point. And I think it gives us more space this year with all this white space to put more pictures of children to remind people, here is who we are asking you to fund. So it could be that there's an alternate visual in addition to the call out box, very open to suggestions about that. But I do think we would not leave the page blank. We would be working to fill the space with reminders of why all of you are in this room as well.
Or with this recommendation, it's really not specific, though. It's pretty broad. It's suggesting that they think about this situation rather than telling them a direction to take. Is that what you wanted to do? The task force wanted to do, is to give them many different options?
I would love for anyone to share. I mean, we talked about some of those options. I'm trying to remember where the conversation went, if the task force thought maybe we shouldn't call out any special items that might upset people, or whether that would be something to add in as examples of what could be tapped.
So I do wonder, to Farishay's point, like we often get questions about how much federal dollars is going into the system. I know we have one, just a pie chart to, the percent, just the percentages of like federal funds to state, to local, however that looks. We'd be happy to share it with you. And y'all could change whatever you want in it, but it's kind of already there because we get asked frequently, like, to break it down.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about the white spaces, because there's this perception by many in the legislature that we are just overly funded with federal dollars. There's plenty of money from feds, and so why do we need state money? I think that's a good question.
So it could not only show the pie proportions, but have the amounts. So they see it's only 114 million. It's not as much as you might think.
I mean, a way to address both these points may be, in the task force, we looked at various headlines from other states who are using all sorts of creative variations for how to fund it, everything from a hotel tax to CBD to take your pick. There's, 40 different ways to do it. You could pick 5 or 6 of the headlines and come up with an interesting visual way to say, basically, lots of other states are investing in creative ways. And that then inherently both answers we may not be investing enough, particularly if you pick the Texas and take your pick other examples. And we may not be investing creatively enough, which is abundantly true. But you're putting sort of examples there that just reinforce the point. But to specifically answer the point, that it was a conscious choice to leave it open. I think there are dozens of ways to solve this problem. And I don't necessarily think there's a perfect right way for Louisiana, but there needs to be additional revenue to address this problem. And if a local community has political will to do a occupancy tax, I think it's weird to have hotel occupancy be your way to fund early childhood education, but if it works for you, more power to you. Versus if you want to do some other way, don't really care as long as we get to the positive outcome. Yeah.
In the second to last sentence and the last sentence, it says one option is to review the state's current tax revenue. And in the last sentence, it says another option is to study the revenue. Is there a way maybe and I'm asking the commission, does anyone have a suggestion on how maybe we can be more specific? Or Rep. Freiberg, what do we say? One option is to establish a review committee or a study group.
I do think though it's differentiating between, I think it's the second half of the sentence. So one is saying to identify loopholes to be closed, and one is saying what's being missed by under collection.
Oh, yes. I just meant like, what's the action? Like, I know we need to study it, but who then would be in charge of doing that? Is that an act of just a legislator, or would they need to establish something in order to get those two actions completed? In order to, your point, to make it more specific, like actionable, I guess is what I'm getting to.
See that recommendation 3 happens. Yes. Mhm. Well, any other thoughts on that? I mean, perhaps that's something we could think about more between the interim report and the next report too. See if we could figure out what a strategy might be to help make recommendation 3 happen. I'm not sure what it would be, but maybe we can think about it.
It might be timely if- with the, not this legislative session, but the next one being a fiscal,
Right.
like to kind of lean in at the next fiscal session related to this, the items that we were just talking about.
Okay, and then we have our conclusion. Which tries to repeat that this is, in line and keeping with the proposed title, that this is really one of the smartest investments and how it delivers on that investment. And just reiterating those 3 recommendations. Any suggestions related to the conclusion? If there are none, I don't want to rush you, but if there are none, I will just run through the report from the beginning to make sure that we have identified each of the suggested changes and that we haven't missed anything. So on the executive summary page, we will update that first sentence of the last paragraph about the 78,000 more young children. There are 78,000 more young children who are ready to learn and grow and still need access to high quality early care and education. In the introduction, we'll see that same sentence will essentially break up that bolded part and say the state's investment has benefited tens of thousands of young children. However, there are approximately 78,000 more young children who are ready to learn and grow and still need access to high quality early care and education. It came up during our discussion of recommendation 1, but we will look in each section for ROI and make sure that we're defining that in each area that it comes up as return on investment. Also under recommendation 1, we'll add the word still. There are approximately 78,000 young children in Louisiana still waiting for the opportunity. Under recommendation 2, we will work to either break out visually or maybe to Mr. Tipton's points, maybe we can add some commas to break up some of those ands to help that recommendation just read a little more smoothly. And we will do some wordsmithing to add or tweak a sentence or two about, although there is a current balance of $32.8 million, the Early Childhood Education Fund is projected to fall short or be nearly depleted by the end of 2024, 2025, and be unable to match local fundraising in 2025, 2026, something like that. And then maybe a second sentence about how important it is to acknowledge and support the momentum building in local communities. Under recommendation 3, I have that we might add a pie chart of the federal and the state and the local funding, showing how that's broken out in Louisiana, the percentages and the amounts from each of those funding sources that go into funding birth to 3. And then it sounded like there was a suggestion, but I'm not sure if we landed on it with approval of maybe giving some of examples of, or at least noting many other states are investing very creatively, such as, and maybe giving 1 or 2 examples of what other states are doing.
I mean, my suggestion was not even listing them out, but literally a visual of the headlines. I mean, we've all seen those in the news where it's sort of a, this, that, and the other. We looked at 10 or so in the task force. So I think you could do that. It would create a visual. It would reinforce your point. Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying that, since I missed that. I think you were clear and I just missed that. So is the commission in favor of that? Okay, and then I had no notes on the conclusion. So did we miss anything? Any final thoughts?
I wanted to say that one of the things that keeps coming to mind for me is that there is a lack of sufficient childcare programs in the state, regardless if we get enough money to fund more children receiving the services, and regardless of whether or not we get local investment or that type of thing. But I don't see any mention anywhere of the fact that we need to also find a way to generate more childcare programs in the state. And it just, to me, that feels like a huge piece that's missing. And if that's something that we want to explore further, like Dr. Sonia has mentioned, in a bigger report and a further ask for like the fiscal section next year, I understand that. But I just wanted to point out that to me, that really stands out. And I represent the Department of Children and Family Services. And there are parts of this state where we really struggle to find childcare. And I know that other families that are living in those areas of the state, that are living in a state of poverty, that need these services, they are suffering the same way the children we serve are suffering. And so I just wanted to bring that point up and just hear what the feedback was of the commission on why we're not putting that here.
I appreciate you flagging that for a number of reasons. I'm very happy to hear commission feedback after I say this, because I think it's just hard to explain to legislators the complexity about what I'm about to try to say. I think it's hard to then put it down into a report. I think what's exciting, one of the graces that came out of a very horrible situation of the pandemic is that we did see that with growing dollars, programs were able to build capacity. And with some of the work we do with Ready Start networks and that, advocates are doing around the state to really promote access building, we have seen access grow. We have seen new programs open. We've seen creative ways of opening new classrooms in non-traditional sites. We have seen the access grow. And the reality is that if we receive $980 million today, we would not have seats for all 78,000 children right away. We do need time to build those programs, exactly to your point. One of the ways that I'm excited that, we have both this commission and we have an advisory council. And as many of you may know, some of you serve on both, we have been piloting contracted seats for several years, and we are looking to codify that into policy. We're bringing that this spring to be codified into policy to go into effect next year because of exactly what you're talking about. For one thing, when you have those contracted seats models, you can guarantee that you are providing seats to these underserved parishes and these underserved areas and these underserved families. For another thing, when providers know that they can afford to be open because they can expect seats from you and a steady income from the amount of seats that you're contracting with them for, they're more willing. It's not the same kind of risk. They can expand access. They can open a site. They can join the program and become CCAP certified. And so we do have more work to do in that area, but we're making really great gains and successes in that area. And so I agree, it's very important. I don't know how to explain it simply. So I don't think that answers your question about whether or not that should or shouldn't be included in this report or the next report. But those are some of the things that I think we could explain if we were to include it in a report. So I leave the commission with your question and your point. You feel like that's something we should try to explain in future?
I mean, sure, at some point in the future, I think it's worth explaining, but I guess I would just draw the connectivity between our sort of point number two, the idea of having more or less a guarantee that local funding will be matched is effectively saying you now have a business model that is not crazy.
Mhm.
So you should think about how to explore and expand. So the state will match whatever locals put in. Locals will then do what locals do on economic development, which is say where is there an opportunity to grow? What do we need? So locals put in, state will match it. Now you have a revenue model that can sustain and grow a business model. Now, does that business model have all the other things it needs? No, of course not. I mean, we funded a grant down in Jefferson Parish that's doing sort of the long-term leadership training. Like we don't have the talent we need. We don't have the leadership we need. We don't have all the other things we need. But those things begin to solve themselves when you have a business model that is somewhat sustainable. And up to now, we've not dealt with that. And so in some ways, we're saying deal with this first, and then that will follow. I think we ought to do that other work, but I think you can't do that other work until you have a business model that works over time.
But I also think if we're talking about access at some point, to Michael's point he just made, we have to talk about family childcare homes and how that is a place for many young children in the community when you don't have a more formal childcare center. But that also then leads to a conversation of what does quality look like in a family childcare home? And y'all have done tremendous work about making sure family childcare homes could come into academic approval to start that conversation. And so I do think that over time we should probably grapple with that piece as well. Because they're integrally a part of our early childhood education community. And I know that Karen, I believe you ran a pilot here in the Greater Baton Rouge area, and then Children's Coalition ran a pilot too, to learn from those pilots about how you got those providers in to be able to increase more access.
Yeah, so whether it's for the September report or a next year report, perhaps that's one way that we could introduce it. Maybe we can show the impact of the money that's allowing us to open more programs and highlight some of that creative work. Because I agree that legislators may not know, besides our fierce advocates in the room, they may not know how much work is being done. And to Dr. Polito's point, how much work is being done in the community at all levels. Those of you raising money, yes, but also the programs, and you're both, but also the programs to expand capacity. It really is remarkable. So maybe we can think about a way to show that story. I think that last time this body was together, we talked about a lot of storytelling that we want to do in that report coming up. And one of them was showing that day in the classroom, for example, and all the impacts. So maybe this next report really is about crafting stories that show the complexity of this system in hopefully a more receivable way.
And layers of that, I think, exist with our early ed month. We're going to tell the story on paper, but when these representatives, legislators can get into centers to see not only the good work, but the complexities. So right now we're in this lovely building and seating behind tables, and hundreds and hundreds of 1 and 2 and 3-year-olds are scurrying around classrooms, and teachers are changing diapers and all the things that are happening. And so I think when they see it, it just really hits home in another
And
way.
hear it,
Yeah.
hear all the
That's
language
right.
and all the learning and the curiosity. Yes.
If it's quiet, it's broken.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Just real brief, sitting and listen, this is nice. And one of the things that really concerns me is that as a commission, we addressed basically those who are able to match the fund, utilize the fund. What about those communities who can't match it, who can't utilize it? They're not able to participate. So I think as a commission, one thing we can overlook is how do we address that? We can't pretend that it's not still out there, because when you look at the monies that's available and what's been drawn down, I think it's quite obvious. It hasn't been drawn down because people don't have the matching resources to do that. And so, although I think it's a great plan, I think we have to find ways, to incorporate those communities that are less fortunate, that don't have the resources to match. Because I think we'll continue to do what we do. We make the good ones better at the expense of those who are not doing well, and they seem to lag. And at the end of the day, when we do outcomes, that's the albatross that's around our neck. They bring the scores down. They bring everything down because we're not investing in those areas at the same rate. And we all would agree, maybe we would agree that is where the greatest need is. So I think when we fashion these models, it should address the greatest need, because when I think you address the greatest need and we exceed in those areas, I think we've done well for everyone across the state. So I think that is something, that we can't just totally ignore. We have to address it, even if it's only to say in the future. We have to come up with models and ways to implement strategies that would include and uplift those communities as well.
And I think like that's part of maybe whenever we have another commission meeting after we get through this initial piece, is like what a potential funding formula look like that met the needs of the communities. And so that you don't have the disparity that you were talking about, because we don't have, we really don't have a sustainable way right now to fund our early care and education system. And we wouldn't think about not funding 3rd grade, but we do think about not fully funding birth to 4-year-olds. And like, what does that look like? And what would a funding formula look like for, our kids that are furthest from opportunity to closest to opportunity? And what does that gradient look like? Because we don't know that. So I think that's a great point.
Simply getting the 98,000 or the 98 million or the 15 million that we're talking about doesn't solve the problem unless they're able to participate. So I think that's a bigger problem.
To that point, I do think it's worth calling out that, and you all should correct me if I'm wrong, but the match fund already enables, it doesn't have to be a match. Like, it's a two-way fund that can be used proactively to fund in places that cannot, by some definition that the state would provide a match, or can be used to match. The problem is, up to now, we don't have enough funding to even match the dollars that are coming in. So the thought was, you need to actually match what people are already taxing themselves for before you start trying to figure out how to do the other side. But it is written as a way to be able to do both.
We have looked at it that way, but as we've done the contracted seats model, we felt like that's one way we can begin that work faster. All right, well, before I turn it back over to Dr. Chesson, I just wanted to thank this commission so very much for your hard work over this year, but for many of you, it's been for multiple years. Thank you very, very much for yet another successful year. And thanks to the task force members, both those present and those not with us today, so much for your hard work. We have some upcoming task force meetings to begin thinking about the next report and the ongoing work to come. But I know that Dr. Chesson would like to share and close us out.
We still do not have quorum, although we had a few other people join us. We will not be able to officially endorse and approve our report However, we will still, as the facilitators of this commission, be finalizing the report and turning it over to the legislature on time, as required by legislation, just to let you all know. So we'll be doing that in the next few weeks. Do we have any public comment today? Because I know we'll take public comment one way or another, whether we have quorum or not. We don't have any public comment. Okay, just wanted to check on that. Just also wanted to give another brief update. This is my last commission meeting. As we shift as an agency, we have a new state administration, a new state legislature for the most part, a new, mostly new Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. So we're making some organizational shifts as an agency. And one thing that I'm actually very thrilled about, I think we all are excited about, is that we are going to separate early childhood into its own office. Right now, the Division of Early Childhood lives within the Office of Teaching and Learning, but Dr. Brumley and I made the decision to move early childhood and elevate the Division of Early Childhood back again into its own Office of Early Childhood. I think this is a really positive move that signals, I think, to all of our stakeholders and to everyone as a state, the importance of early childhood and the importance of early childhood here to us at the Louisiana Department of Education. And so this is my last meeting serving in this role, and we have brought on a new assistant superintendent to lead the new Office of Early Childhood, and that's Ms. Malin Baker, coming to us from the Board of Regents. She'll be joining us in just a few weeks, and she'll be sitting in my seat and in this role for our next Early Childhood Commission meeting. I am really excited about still working alongside early childhood and what we've been able to do over the last 4 years. I think with the Division of Early Childhood being within the Office of Teaching and Learning, we've been able to make some really strong connections from a teaching and learning perspective, from early childhood through K-12 teaching and learning. And so I'm excited to still work closely with early childhood and ensuring those transitions and those connections are very strong. But I have so enjoyed my work in early childhood. So thankful to all of you as stakeholders for being so kind and welcoming into the team that I've been able to lead these last nearly 4 years. So it is a bittersweet moment, though I'm very thrilled for the elevation of early childhood. Sad to no longer be leading it as part of one of my work streams, but happy to work alongside it. So thanks to all of you for being such wonderful stakeholders in this work that's really so near and dear to my heart.
Thank you for your tremendous support of early childhood, Dr. Chassel.
Okay, so with that, our meeting is concluded, though not adjourned since we do not have a quorum. So it's concluded for today. Thank you all for coming out and for giving all of the great feedback on the commission report that will now be handed over to the legislature. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. Oh, yeah.